So good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us at the 2021 NKY Restoration Weekend Kickoff. This is our cocktail hour. We've got some great speakers lined up, and we want to welcome you to our event. This is our 10th year, and we're all very excited. We've worked very hard to try and put together an interesting program with the constraints that we're all working with. So welcome here. We are broadcasting, we are actually producing this from the Newport History Museum, which is an old African-American school in the city of Newport, Kentucky. And this is very much a preservation project and a preservation example itself. So welcome, glad to see you all here. And we're gonna have some fun. We're going to taste a little bourbon. We're going to hear about some history. But first off, we're going to hear from an excellent gentleman named Scott Sidler. He was the founder and CEO of Austin Historical, a historic window and door restoration company in Orlando, Florida. He is also the editor-in-chief of the Craftsman blog, a website dedicated to teaching people how to understand and restore their old houses. His work has been featured in Fine Home Building, DIY Network, HGTV, the New York Post, and NPR. Scott and his wife and 3 kids live in a 1918 home in Orlando that, like most old houses, is constantly being restored. And most of you who are on here can certainly understand that. And Scott's gonna shed some light on this for all of us. So, please remember, if you have questions, to enter them in the question and answer box, and we will field them to Scott throughout the presentation and at the end. And there will be a period after his presentation for questions and answers as well. So without any further more talk from me, I'd like to introduce Mr. Scott Sidler.
All right, so glad to be with you guys today. Wish I could be there in person. I'm in preservation. It's my second career. My first career was actually in musical theater. So standing on a stage in front of a bunch of people is actually strangely way more comfortable for me than it is to be talking to a computer in an empty office. So we are doing the best with what we have these days, and it is definitely 2021, but I'm excited you guys are all here. And we are going to be talking about preservation and why preservation matters and what you can do about it. So let me get this set up here, share my screen here so you guys can see what we have. All right, cool. So like Scott had said, I found and run Austin Historical. We restore windows and doors down here in Orlando. And yes, there are historic buildings in Orlando. It is not all Disney and Universal. There are actually a surprisingly large amount of historic buildings in Central Florida and Florida throughout. And so part of our mission there is to educate and empower homeowners. And one of the ways we do that is with the Craftsman blog, where I'm posting weekly, and on a YouTube channel. You can always check that out. I'm on Instagram a lot too. And just trying to communicate to people and show them like preservation in action. And also give them like the tools, supplies, tutorials, and everything that you need to really restore these old houses, because I'm a firm believer that preservation and restoration is something that every one of us can do. This is not something that is just for an elite few or people who have extraordinary training. My training started by going to the library and reading books and watching YouTube videos by people who were smarter and had done this before me, and just standing on the shoulders of giants. So there's a lot you can learn, and if you're not afraid of trial and error, my website, the Craftsman blog, has a lot of stuff to help you not make the same mistakes I did when I first started. So I'm going to start here. Everybody remember some of these signs? For those of you who are old enough, a lot of you are probably not, but these were the old Uncle Sam wants you, or preservation needs you in this case. And so I'm going to posit something to you guys. I'm going to posit a situation to you. And I'd be curious to see how many of you believe me. And this is hard to do without a bunch of feedback, since I don't get to see nodding heads or shaking heads or waving arms. But I believe that every single one of the people on here and every homeowner in the US, every just individual citizen has far more power and influence on historic preservation in this country than do any of the preservation professionals, any of the architects, the contractors, city planners, any of these people that you as an individual John and Jane Doe homeowner have more influence and more power and matter more to preservation than the rest of us who are working in the field. And I don't know how many of you believe me on that. And I'd ask for a show of hands if you could, but since we're not doing that, just think about it in your head and see if you believe that. My goal is that by the end of this, you will see what I'm talking about and believe what I'm talking about. So with trying to understand if preservation, that you really do matter to preservation and preservation actually needs you, I would say the first thing we have to tackle is, why does preservation even matter? Right? Here we are, it's 2021. We are a society that is obsessed with environmental, being good stewards of the environment. Mostly these days, it focuses on energy efficiency, things like that. There are things going around like the Green New Deal and things like that that touch on preservation, but aren't quite in line with preservation, or slightly different or kind of tertiary to it. But why does preservation actually matter? So we're going to go through a few of these. And you may recognize some of these buildings, but I'm going to go through them. This is the Singer Building in New York, New York. It was the tallest building in the world from 1908 to 1909. It lost that to the MetLife Tower. It was only the tallest for 1 year. And when it was raised in 1968, it was the largest building ever demolished at the time. And up until 9/11, when the World Trade Center came down, it was still the largest building ever deconstructed and demolished. It was an extraordinary building built by the Singer sewing machine company that was doing quite well in the early 20th century. It was built, another interesting thing, it was built by there was no general contractor. The owners of the Singer company just worked with all the subcontractors and trades to get the work done. And it was a beautiful structure. The Garrick Theater in Chicago, Illinois, 1891 to 1960. It was actually one of the tallest buildings in Chicago at its opening. Had a 1,300 seat theater with this absolutely gorgeous proscenium arch that you can see here that has been unrivaled. And is considered one of the greatest design collaborations with a famous architecture firm, Adler and Sullivan. And it was torn down in 1960 and became a parking lot. This is the terminal station in Birmingham, Alabama, which is 6 of the 7 railways serving Birmingham collaborated to build the terminal. These were private railways that got together. And it was a very unusual structure for its time. A lot of the people in the area thought it was very unusual, and it was. It's a Byzantine kind of inspired Beaux Arts design. And at its peak, it serviced 54 trains a day. And then by 1969, rail service had fallen off so much that there were only 7 trains a day. And then it was demolished and paved over, and it's now a part of the interstate system in Birmingham. This is the Astor House in New York, New York. Pretty incredible building. It was built by John Jacob Astor, who assembled the lots around his former house until he had accumulated a full city block, and built this. It was the first luxury hotel in New York City. It was built in 1836, which is pretty impressive. That's early in our country's history. And had 309 rooms and 5 stories. It had gas lights, which is one of the first that had it produced in the hotel's own gas plant. Such famous things like Lincoln stayed there on the way to his inauguration, to his inaugural address. And it was razed, torn down in 1913 as new hotels with modern amenities challenged its status. Here's another one that doesn't get a lot of talk, but to me, it's one of the most beautiful train stations, the Wabash Terminal in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. 50 years it survived. It only lasted 4 years as a train station when the Wabash Railway went into receivership. Had various uses, but it was damaged by 2 successive fires in 1946, and it was razed in 1954 to make way for the Gateway Center, which is a modern nondescript office and hotel in the area. This one is the City Hall Post Office in New York, 1905 to 1939, a very short-lived building. This is right across the street from the Astor House, actually. And it was designed by architect Alfred B. Mullett It had pneumatic tubes, which was amazing for its time, for sorting mail efficiently to be sent to other places. It was built with 10-foot thick walls at the time, solid granite. And the design was, even at the time it was built, was extremely unpopular. It was called Mullet's Folly. The New York Times even said of it, the quote was, "The Mullet post office has always been an architectural eyesore and has from the first been unsatisfactory to the Postal Service and the federal courts beneath its roof." And it's now considered one of Mullet's best works and a missing element in City Hall Park in downtown New York. An interesting fact about this building is it was built so solidly that during demolition, it broke several wrecking balls. It cracked the iron wrecking balls that they were trying to use, which really kind of shocked the demolition contractor. He'd never seen that before. This was built so well. This is the Chicago Federal Building in Chicago, Illinois. 60 years this survived. It had a gilded dome larger than the US Capitol. In 1907, the antitrust case that broke up the Standard Oil occurred here. Walt Disney himself actually worked here in the mailroom in the post office for a few months in 1918. Al Capone was tried here for tax evasion, and it grew too small for the government's needs, and it was razed in 1965. This here is the US Post Office in Boston. You notice there's a lot of government buildings in here too. And if you can see, it's actually dressed up in mourning for Ulysses S. Grant's funeral, which he passed away not long after it was opened in 1885. It was designed again by Alfred Mullet in the Second Empire style, and kind of a modern backlash against the Second Empire style kind of took hold in the 1920s and 1930s, and it was demolished in 1929, shortly after. A lot of you may recognize this one. This is Penn Station. This building really started the modern historic preservation movement in this country. The station was built in 1910, and it encompassed 8 acres in New York and down in around 34th Street in New York City. Its head house and train, which the head house is everything that's above the ground here, were considered just a masterpiece of Beaux Arts style. And as passenger travel shrank after World War II, in 1963, the Penn Railroad sold its air rights and kept only the tracks below ground. Everything else was demolished, and Madison Square Garden was built over top of this. Some other pictures of it. This is the interior of Penn Station. Just an absolutely stunning building. The light in here, the ironwork, everything. It had the largest public spaces in New York City at the time when it was around. Because of this, in 1965, New York City passed a Landmarks Preservation Act, which served to protect Grand Central Terminal from demolition in 1968. So they almost lost both of these. This is it during demolition, what was left with it at the time. And then this one's a little closer to home for you guys in Kentucky. This is the old post office in Louisville. It was built in 1885 and was only in service until 1933 when a new post office was built. It had Louisville's first atrium, and it was demolished in 1943. It had been uninhabited for about 10 years, close to a decade at the time. And most people were happy to see it go at that time. After it was demolished, it became a park for 1 year, and it later was turned into a JCPenney's and Grant's department store. Here's some pictures of it during the demolition as it's being torn down. So it's not just landmarks, right? You're thinking like, what can I do to save, what would I do if I had been there when they were tearing down Penn Station? Really not much. You could have spoken up about it, right? But this is not just the thing that's happening on these huge landmarks in huge cities. All across the country, buildings get torn down. Old buildings, small buildings, large, historic homes, all these states. I believe this one was called the Scooby-Doo House in Kentucky. That was torn down just recently. So it brings me to the point that I think this quote is especially telling, that a city without old buildings is like a man without a memory, right? They're one of our few links to the past. So you can go to a museum, you can go to an art gallery, and you can look at these beautiful paintings. You can see them, you can't touch them, you can't get too close to them. But these old buildings, you actually can go in them. You can walk up the stairs and run your hand up that same railing that somebody has done for 200 years or more. Another quote by somebody who's a lot more eloquent than me: how will we know it's us without our past? Right? We as people, we are who we are. Each one of you that are here today, you are who you are because of the things that have happened in your past, the mistakes you've made, the successes you've had, the people you've met, the books you've read. All these things have shaped us into who we are. And if you delete those memories, if you delete what that is, then you're going to make the same mistakes that you did before, right? The same mistakes of, if you were in a car accident on a particular corner because you're like, I didn't really look there. I guarantee you, I've been there. It's like, now every time I go past that intersection, I look extra cautiously. I go a little bit slower because my brain says, hey, in the past, this was dangerous, danger, danger, pay attention here. And I pay attention to that. Should I pay attention to every intersection? Probably, but that's how we are as people. We respond to our memories. We are products of our past, and who we become in the future is largely dependent on our past. And that same thing applies not just to us as individuals, but to our entire society. Who are we as a society? How did we build things? How did we make things? What were our spaces like? That's an important thing. Now, this is a contemporary here of ours. Donovan Ripma says, it's not a terribly memorable quote, but there's a lot of information here. So he says, rehabilitating historic properties conserves taxpayers' dollars, conserves our local heritage, and conserves the natural environment. Rehabilitating historic buildings and using the infrastructure that is already in place to serve them is the height of fiscal and environmental responsibility. Right? For a country, for a society who's so focused right now on, we need to be more green, right? We need to pay attention to the climate. We need to take care of this earth and who we are. We are very, very, very quick to go tear down buildings and put new ones up because we think, well, that house doesn't matter. I couldn't stop that one. That developer in our town, I know he or she, they just tear this one down, but they build very nice stuff in place of it. Why not find an empty lot? If we're really going to be fiscally and environmentally responsible, why not find an empty lot to put that building? Why tear this down, throw it in the landfill and build something new when there's already something there? So here's a number, and I would love to have everybody just shout out what this number means. Obviously, this is not going to apply on a Zoom call, but 310,000, it's a big number. Think about it real quick. What could that number possibly be in terms of what we're talking about? It is the pounds of waste per 2,000 square foot building that's demolished. 310,000 pounds of waste is created when you demolish a 2,000 square foot building. That's an average size home today. In the suburbs, in some places, maybe it's a little bit larger, it's a little bit smaller, but you're generating around 310,000 pounds of waste per 2,000 square foot building. So now I'm going to give you another number. You can think about this one too for a second. 300 to 400,000. Think about what that, anybody have an idea of what that might mean? That's the number of buildings demolished each year in the United States. And I think you can see where this is going. For those of you who are math nerds, I'll jump right to it so you don't sit there with your calculator and do it ahead of time. That means 93 to 124 billion, with a B, pounds of waste go into the landfills every year because of buildings that we demolish. Now there's, to be fair, these are not all, Penn stations that are being demolished, right? These are, some of them are historic landmarks. Some of them are simple homes. Some of them are poorly built buildings that are really condemned and very dangerous and probably should be torn down. But this goes to the point of, like talking about that post office in New York City. It was built so well that they struggled to tear that building down. So when we build, why don't we build like they did back in the day, where they had a sense of, I'm building this for generations, not for the next 5 or 10 years. Build buildings that are not commodities, but rather assets that appreciate and have a value and don't need to go into the landfill, that can stay in the landfill. So there's a famous saying that says the greenest building is the one that is already built. And this quote is by some smart guy. No, actually his name is Carl Elefante. But this to me is the height of what historic preservation is really about. I'm somebody who restores old windows, because I believe it is a major waste to go throw out a window that'll last 100 years to put in a vinyl window that will last 10 to 15 years, and then start somebody, a homeowner or a building owner, on a process where every 10 to 15 years they have to throw all their windows out and buy a new round of windows. That is an ugly treadmill, rat race, whatever you want to call it, of waste. And it comes from a generation that we all belong to, that I have termed the replacement generation. We believe that when something is old, it should be replaced. It was not always this way. Those of you, my grandfather grew up during the Depression, and I remember specifically throwing some nails out in his garage when I was helping him in his workshop. I was probably 8 years old, and he had me pick them out of the garbage and put them on the counter and straighten them out with a hammer, because he's like, we don't waste things in this house. I went, but these are just bent nails. But his thinking was, why would I throw away perfectly good nails that I can have my 8-year-old grandson straighten out for me and I can reuse for something down the line? So the idea that we live in this replacement generation, I think, has been spurred on by technology, right? The idea that when a computer is 5 years old, it's just obsolete. It has no real purpose anymore. But that does not apply to our historic architecture, to our built environment. Buildings, if they're built properly, even new construction, and I'm not a big new construction guy, but new construction that's built well is meant to last. And most of these buildings built pre-World War II were built to last. They were built with a generational mindset that I'm going to keep this building. My family will live in here, and my children and my grandchildren will still live in this building. That's not what ended up happening. But things have changed a little bit, right? So where do we go from here? What has changed? And it's that replacement mindset, right? When did we stop using our hands? That's a big question. Why are we so many people are afraid to work on something, to change the oil in your car, or to fix a building, to reglaze a window, to patch plaster, because it seems like, well, I need to leave that to the pros. And I want to tell you that, no, you don't have to leave that to the pros. You can do this stuff. You know, we see signs like this all the time. Please don't touch. Touching can harm the art. Please don't walk on the grass. But inside every one of us, there is this kid. We are all right there. We are all this young kid who sees the big yellow line with a black banner around it that says, do not touch. But man, I just want to touch that. And you can see the adult over there in the background looking at it going, I don't know if you should do that. I think that's a bad idea. I mean, this is the height of who we are all inside. We want to touch things. We want to experience the world through that sense. We don't want it removed from us, which I think is why this pandemic has been so hard for us as a society. We want to give hugs. We want to give kisses. We want to shake hands. We want to greet people, see people in person. We are physical beings. We are societal beings, and we want to interact with our environments. And it's very difficult to sanitize ourselves and step back and not touch anything from, you see people opening doors with their elbows and things like that. You experience the world through your fingertips in many ways. And that's how we learned as children. And that still doesn't change as adults. We've just kind of been conditioned not to do it as much. So here's a little picture for you, a little comparison. This is one of the reasons I think why we don't, I guess, work with our hands so much anymore, why we're afraid to mess with things. This is a Ford Model T engine. I'm sure not many of you have actually seen this, but the simplicity of it is kind of amazing to me. You can see it's a 4-cylinder engine. It's got 4 spark plugs, 4 wires. You can see just the basics, 1 fan, one belt. It's pretty simple. This is a 2019 Subaru Forester. I don't know about you. I would give the Ford Model T a try. I'm good with my hands on working on houses. I'm not good at working on cars. I'm learning. I'm trying to get better and force myself out of my comfort zone. This would scare the crap out of me. I wouldn't know where to start. I wouldn't know what each of those thousands of hoses and lines and electronics does, because it's gotten so complicated. Now here's a simple old picture right here that I've asked this question of a lot of times when I've talked to people in organizations, like, say, what is this nice British soldier doing in 1941? He's darning his sock. And I'd love if there's anybody in this webinar that actually knows what it is that actually has darned a sock. And it doesn't mean cursing out the sock. It means basically sewing up a hole in a sock. But thinking about it, we live in that society, right? Where you don't sew holes in socks, you just throw them away and then you buy new socks. We've become so wealthy as a society that we've forgotten some of these skills. We've forgotten that this is really not necessary anymore for us. We can just buy a new one. We can afford it. We're wealthy enough that we don't sew holes. We don't sew up holes in our clothes or our socks. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing we can do. So professionals, are you a preservation professional? Are you a contractor? Are you a preservation planner? Are you an architect? What can you possibly do? What can you do to make a difference? Well, the first thing is you can empower homeowners, right? There are homeowners out there that feel like, well, I have to let the pros do it. Why don't you step out there and show them, teach them what you do? Get on the myriad of platforms that are out there today, from social media, everything, or talk to people locally and empower them to go, you can try this. Let me help you. Let me walk you through it. Share your information. You can create local events to raise awareness like we're doing here. We're talking to people. I'm getting to talk to people who most of which I've never met before. And I don't know if I'll meet you after this. I truly hope I will, and get to hang out and we can sip bourbon together, which would be fantastic. And I'm sad that there is no bourbon here, just water for me at the moment. But you create local events, you do workshops, raise awareness, host things, do a workshop on a skill that you learned, teach some people that how to, if you're somebody who knows how to glaze windows, teach some people how to glaze windows, teach some people how to repair and renovate old houses. You can use social media to inform and motivate. We live in an amazing time when the reach that you have, if you think 30 years ago, the way that you could reach out to people compared to how you can reach out to them today, you can post videos and it's instantaneously in front of billions of people. Now, not many of us have billions of followers, but at least it's out there. And if it's something good, if it's good content that people want and they can share, it will go viral. People will share this information and it will get out there. So if you have something to teach, we're all an expert on something, whatever it is, as a professional, you're an expert on, teach people that piece on your social media. Start a channel, get out there and share it. Educate. Don't just empower them, educate, teach. As much that you can teach. Anything that you are not teaching that goes to the grave with you, maybe you're the last person who knows how to do this or whatever it may be. If you're the last person who knows how to do it and you don't pass that on to the next generation, then you've done them a huge disservice. And then not everybody's a professional. Most of us are homeowners, right? We all own old houses. I'm constantly working on my house, trying to make it better and better and fix it up, repair the rot that happened this year and fix that broken window, all that kind of stuff. But what can you do as a homeowner, right? Do you have the power to stop, Penn Station from being torn down? Maybe, but what can you do? You can start at home. And I think this is where I think we lose track of this a little bit, but historic preservation has always been, and I feel always will be, a grassroots movement. It's much more powerful when you start at home. Start with the person in the mirror. If you want to see a change in this country, you'd be like, I want everybody to be more green. Well, why don't you start recycling more? Why don't you not replace your windows with vinyl? Why don't you preserve the plaster in your home? And you may not know that, hey, the plaster in your home, many people don't know this. Here's a random fact for you. The plaster, when you use true lime plaster, it pulls carbon dioxide out of the air as it cures. We've stopped using it. We don't use it anymore. It's like the greenest option you could possibly have. And that's gone by the wayside. Now we use drywall. It's faster, it's cheaper. But we could have something in houses across the country that's pulling carbon dioxide out of the air. How amazing is that? And we've missed out on that now. So you can start at home. You can focus on what's in your individual home. You can fix that up. And instead of tearing stuff out and replacing them, and maybe you're not generating 310,000 pounds of waste, you can say, I'm just not going to replace that window with vinyl because I can learn how to fix it myself. I can get out there. And if I screw it up, I can do it again. And I can learn, and I can get better and better. And there are resources to help you get better at it. You can work the room. So this is the idea of, if we were at a conference all together, we'd be in a room talking, and then afterward we get out and we go talk and wander through the hallways at any event or at work or any place that you're at, that you go to where there are other people, and you work the room, you talk to people. You share your experiences. You tell them, well, when somebody said, oh, I've got, this house is driving me nuts. The windows are so drafty. Have you tried spring bronze? I tried spring bronze on some of my windows. It was a pain at first, but I figured out how to install it. And then I got all of them. I don't have drafts anymore. Really? You're sharing that with people. You're sharing your successes and your failures too, right? Because it's just as effective if you share your failures with people. When you tell people, oh gosh, don't do that. I replaced this, and I had to replace this plaster ceiling. It was a mess. It just destroyed my wood floors. It did all this. That helps them to learn, hey, maybe I should think twice before I do that. Does it really need it? So work the room, tell people your experiences, and then be a sneezer. So this is a phrase from, I can't think of his right now, Seth Godin, thank you. I blanked on his name. Seth Godin, who's just, I think, a marketing genius and has written dozens of books. One of the things he says is that there are sneezers. So a sneezer is somebody, as a contractor, I am well acquainted with sneezers. When I screw up a window at somebody's house, if that person is a sneezer, they will tell 20 people never to use my company because we did something so awful. And if I do a great job for that same person, they'll go tell 20 people, you got to use Scott's company. They were amazing. We loved everything about it. There are some people who just don't share, right? There are some of us that are like, I'm happy with it. If the contractor came in, they did a bad job, I'm not going to say anything either way. I just want to get over it and be done. But there are some people who are the movers and shakers in your town. You know who they are. They're the people who always talk. Sometimes we call them gossips. Sometimes we call them just chatty people. They like to talk about stuff. But if you are not out there talking about your experiences in preservation, how your old house is, yes, it's difficult. And I love to hate my old house, but I also love to love my old house. If you're out there talking about those kinds of things, then you can be a sneezer for preservation when people go, oh, I would never buy an old house. And you go, let me tell you, I think you're missing out on it. There's a richness to your life that living in a house that's 100 years old or 80 years old or 200 years old that you're just missing. And they don't know it because they haven't had that experience, but they need to hear from you. They need to hear what your take is on this. And so being a sneezer helps you go out there and talk to the world, helps spread the word about preservation, because an article in the New York Times about preservation only does so much. Doing articles, getting featured on media does a little bit and it spreads the word, but really I know from personal experience that I have much more influence on the people that I meet on a day-to-day basis. If you hear me talk, I did a feature on NPR about the Shutter Sunday thing that I do on Instagram, where I shame people, including my own house, about ugly shutters and poorly fitting shutters. And I got a lot of people who responded back to that. They're like, oh, this is great. I didn't know about you. But I don't have nearly as much of a investment in them, and they don't have as much of an investment in me. They don't know me. But if I'm a sneezer, if I'm talking to individuals, in terms of, like, if my neighbor asks me, who do you think, who does a good job on refinishing floors in the area? And I give them a reference. Places like Nextdoor are great like that. If you're a sneezer on Nextdoor, people want to hear referrals from people or share their experiences. Facebook, Twitter, all those kinds of things are where people listen to sneezers. And so that's why I believe, in summary here, that's why I believe that preservation needs you. It needs you to go out there and share, if you're a professional, what you're an expert at. Share your expertise, teach other people. And if you're a homeowner, coming back around to the Penn Station thing, the reason that Grand Central Terminal is in New York City today is because after Penn Station was torn down, there was such a groundswell of response from people who actually thought, when there was talk of tearing it down, they even had plans to do it, they thought, surely this will never happen. Something will stop it. The government will stop it, or the developer will stop, whatever. And they realized that when they went through with it, that it actually just happened. And most people were just in disbelief that it happened. And immediately after that, so 1963, it was torn down. In 1965, they formed a landmarks commission. And 2 years later, they were tasked with possibly tearing down Grand Central Station. And the landmarks commission was formed by a groundswell of citizens who said, we're not going to let this happen to our town again. So if this is going on in your town or in your neighborhood, and you don't like what's happening, it requires you to say something. You can make a difference. I'll tell you right now how much sneezers can make a difference. Here in Orlando, I'll give you a great example of this, how 3, maybe 4 people made a huge difference. There is an area in Orlando called the Greenwood, Fern Creek Greenwood neighborhood, and it was working for years towards becoming a historic district. And there was a lot of support for it. A lot of people were very energetic about it. It was very exciting as they went through this process. It takes about 2.5 years, and they were getting right down to the wire, to the end. And there were 3, maybe 4 people in the neighborhood who misunderstood what was going on, in my opinion, and they revved up a bunch of people. They were sneezers in a negative way here. And the neighborhood ended up giving up and not wanting to be a historic district. The districting failed because these 3 or 4 people were like, they're going to take your rights. They're going to kill your children. They're going to do all these awful things. They're going to blow up your house. Like whatever they were saying, it was just all ridiculous, ridiculous stuff, but it whipped people up, and they were sneezers in a negative way. Well, that same thing happened with Penn Station, that people were like, we're never going to let this happen again. And it was just regular citizens. It wasn't that the architects and the mayor said, we're going to change this, and the governor said, we're going to change this. It was individual citizens who said, we are not going to let this happen in our town again. We care too much about our history. We care too much about our preservation. We are going to do this. And they made the difference. I guarantee you that if you think that if you're waiting for a politician to solve your problems, it's not going to happen. But you as an individual, they do listen to you. And if there's a lot of people saying, we care about this building, this place matters, like the National Trust for Historic Preservation used to do, this place matters. If you're out there chanting it, screaming it from the rooftops, that doesn't mean just being an activist. It just means talking to your friends and telling them why it matters. Because we don't respond well as a society to activists so much. We think that, oh, like the activists on both sides are always the little bit more the wild and crazy folks. But the ordinary folks who would go, here's why I think it matters. To have a civil conversation about something is way more powerful than in times holding up signs and chaining yourself to a tree or a building. But just simply saying it, sharing it with people who might have a different view and having an honest conversation about it, I believe you're going to make way more difference and change more minds. So that's why I believe preservation needs you. And I hope through this, I've been able to convince you of that fact that preservation does need you and you can make a big difference. So I know we have some Q&A here, so I'll try and get out of the screen share if I can figure out how. There it goes. Maybe.
All right.
All right, there we go.
Yeah, so we do have some comments coming through, Scott. A lot of it is people vehemently agreeing with the things that you're saying, of course.
Awesome.
And what's actually interesting, not only they agree with everything that you say, darning the sock. And so we have a lot of people that actually have that experience. But
I was curious, has anybody actually darned a sock that is here today?
Oh, yes, we've got that. We have, well, here, let me give you some of these. Somebody said, Courtney Clark Rankin from Southgate said she knows how to darn a sock. Charles said that he's darned a sweater. Trudy says she has a darned sock. And then Abby says, me too, Trudy. So,
I love it.
Your analogy is great because people seem to actually get what it is that you're saying on this. So
it's an old reference, and strangely, it's not something that I have done. I have not darned a sock, but I was like, I love the simplicity of it, the simple analogy of I'm just going to fix it, and I really struggle with that in the society right now. Even for myself, I've been working on the automotive side of things. Like I really, until recently, had not been somebody who had to change the oil in my car or change a tire more than once or do any mechanical stuff. But I realized, like, this is not beyond me. I can figure this out with the resources out there, things like YouTube or just other things on the internet. There's so much that you can learn so quickly compared to what was 30 or 40 years ago, where you really had to struggle and go to the library and try to find the right book. It's not what it is today. It's great.
No, and it's so much that that to be able to use those powers, and is everything a success? No, it's not. But trying it and working on it and getting that information is really to the heart of what you're saying, which is to have people come out and try new things and talk to people about it and help with workshops. And that's part of what we see here. So, Scott, will you also tell our crowd the session that you're doing for us tomorrow?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to be teaching a session on basically when issues, kind of preventing issues from becoming disasters. And for me, this has been a big part of it. Is like, I love restoring things. I love the before and after, but not sometimes, it's always more cost effective to stop something when it is a small issue before it becomes a big issue. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. A lot of those things of like how that snowball rolls down the hill and how you can kind of stop that. What kind of things you can do if you're an owner of an old house to stop that progression from, little tiny leak to massive rot that's causing the whole building to be torn down, or one termite comes in your house and now you've got swarms and swarms after a decade that have eaten everything away. So, if we're not good stewards of the buildings that we have, it's very, very easy to lose track of them and it to just overwhelm us. So I'm going to try to teach you guys how to look for how to look for those small issues and catch them before they become those big disasters, and save a lot in the pocketbook in the meantime.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. That session is tomorrow afternoon at 2:25. And it's in the schedule that's on the website. So we've had a lot of comments that people absolutely agree with the fact of, not filling up our landfills with this historic materials, especially the craftsmanship that we lose from it. And with a lot of comments are how shocking those numbers are that you put out, how many billions of pounds of waste that actually accumulate. Isn't there also a statistic that talks about how much waste is generated from a new build as well?
I didn't dig some of those up, but I know that there are, and that's one of the big conversation points we have with people when they talk about replacing their windows here, where they say, well, these are more energy efficient. So I'll give you this kind of fact on there because I know the numbers from my area is if you replace a house of an average size house replace all the single pane windows with double pane windows here in Central Florida, EnergyStar.gov says that you will save $155 per year on your energy bills. So when you spend $20,000, $10,000 to replace all those windows, they don't pay for themselves until 20, 30, in most cases, 40 years down the line. So the idea of the new construction that we don't really think about too much is, well, yeah, we threw away those old windows, but we still had to go pull new materials out of the earth. We had to go get, in the case of vinyl, we had to get petrochemicals out. We had to get fossil fuels out. We had to turn them into vinyl. We had to process them. That requires energy. We had to manufacture glass. We had to use argon gases and metal spacers and rubber and all these things, all these materials that had to be pulled out of the earth, manufactured, turned into a product, and then transported hundreds or thousands of miles to where it needs to get to, and then installed into your house. So it's not just the waste of throwing those items out. If there is the waste of, if you just took your windows out and threw them in the trash, there's the waste from it. But you've got to put something else back there. And in most cases, these buildings are not being torn down and just left as a fallow lot. They're being torn down and something new is being built back upon it, rather than taking what's there and adaptive reuse or remodeling it or changing it, but keeping what's there. I mean, I saw a project here in Winter Park, Florida, where they tore it was the fourth oldest house in town. They tore it down, or their plan was to tear it down. We ended up saving it, and they put it on a barge, floated it across the river, across a lake onto another lot. But they were going to tear it down because they didn't like the style of it. And the house that they built back, I swear, looks exactly like the house that was there. There's so little difference. You're like, well, this one's larger. It's like, you could have added on. It would have been very simple, just add on. But they were like, well, we want new. And it was a very expensive lot, and they had the money to do it, and they did it. It's just wasteful when you think about the options that you have out there. And, a lot of us have that mindset of we've been programmed that newer is better. But the only truth to that is newer is newer. Better is better. Whether better is older is fine. I wish I knew who I could credit this to. Somebody credited it to me once. And I was like, no, I heard that somewhere and I don't know who. And it's mostly quoted as unknown source, but it's the idea that it's not good because it's old. It's old because it's good. The reason it's still here is because it was built so well. And people ask me that in Florida all the time. Like, aren't you nervous about buying an old wood house, hurricanes and everything? I'm like, well, it made it through the last 100 years of hurricanes. So this one seems to be doing pretty well. The ones that were not built well, they blew down in the first few hurricanes or after another 10 or 20 or 30 hurricanes. So the stuff left standing has stood the test of time if we would leave it to stand the test of time.
We've also had some questions about the aesthetics of older materials, as far as the feel, the look, the texture, and even questions about the concept of reusing old materials that have actually come from another building, as to whether there's resources out there. We know there are locally, but do you run across that also in your part of the country or some of the other places you've been?
We do. As far as the reusing building materials, it's very difficult with building codes now to reuse any in structural elements. There's very few. Everything has to have a product approval code or has to have a rating. Old lumber does not have a rating, even though it's a lot harder and larger even than some of the new lumber today, but it has to be, stamped a certain thing it has to be graded, and old lumber was never graded. So you can use it in a lot of ways from architectural salvage yards, but you just usually cannot use it for structural purposes. So you couldn't frame an old house. You couldn't build a new house out of old framing, but you certainly could make all the, do all your trim out of it. You could make countertops out of old materials. You could use it for decoration, any kind of option that you want that's not structural, that's not, has to comply with building codes on there. You could absolutely use those old materials. And a lot of buildings, in the past have done that. To the idea of like the attractiveness of these old buildings, everything's like a pendulum, right? It swings on back and forth in terms of design. There was a very big push towards ornamentation in the mid to late 1800s, the Victorian side. It swung a little bit further when you got to Craftsman bungalows to a simpler kind of style in the 20s and things. And then you got into modernism, which was the idea of we need to be devoid of its form follows function only, and there's no need for ornamentation or vaulted ceilings or anything. It's like geometric shapes, squares, triangles, all these kinds of basic things. And people were just so, it was a very efficient architecture, but it was so dehumanizing for a lot of people. They're like, I just don't like these buildings. It left people with a bad taste in their mouth. And now we're in a postmodern style of architecture, and it will change again. We don't know what it will change to, but I know that pendulum will continue to swing and move in different directions. And I'm sure at some point, it seems like there's a move back towards more surrounding ourselves with more beautiful things, more attractive things that make life a little bit nicer and less utilitarian than it has been for the years that I've been alive. Most of my life has been in the modern or postmodern period. So.
Well, Scott, thank you very much for sharing with us. We've had a number of comments of agreement. One, Christopher actually asked, when did we stop using our hands is the key, and valuing these materials. So thank you for sharing this with us. If you have any other comments, we are going to move on to our bourbon tasting. As I say, please make sure that you've signed up to win one of the prizes that Scott Sidler has provided for us. You'll get an opportunity to hear more from him, visit the Craftsman blog, and be able to see some more of the work that's been here. So,
absolutely, just glad to be here and speak with you guys. And do check out. There's some really cool prizes on there. One of them in particular is that new the teachable Windows course that I put together. The idea of like, when do we stop using our hands? That you can really learn how to do Windows hands-on. That I teach the people who can win that prize in dozens and dozens of videos teaching you every step of the way to restore your own Windows. And I firmly believe that that anyone here who's able-bodied enough to climb up on a ladder a little bit can restore bits and pieces of these old houses, and don't be afraid of it. And I don't want to talk any longer because I know that there's a bourbon tasting and I never want to interfere with a bourbon tasting.
Absolutely.
Kentuckians. I've learned that this is very important.
Absolutely. And one of the things I do want to encourage the people that are within the Northern Kentucky, Greater Cincinnati area, please utilize the professionals to help you get on track if you need that. So the communities of Covington and Newport have historic preservation officers that are willing to help you with your projects, to understand what you need to do. The Cincinnati Preservation Association, which is one of our partners, actively works in Cincinnati. And so this not only Scott's presentation, but also this weekend is brought to you thanks to a generous grant from the National Park Service through our certified local government funds, and also a dedicated group of professionals that actually work for this all through the year. So Scott, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Look forward to seeing your session tomorrow, and make sure you all register for those. Everybody's very excited about hearing more from you. So
Thanks so much, guys.